Mary Me, Annie here. I'm going to enter into the discussion that we are having about raising pagan children. I'll VR this to MonsoonMagick because she's the first video I saw, although I've seen wonderful ones since. And this is really fun to see what everybody's view of it is. Whether we haven't been raising our children yet, or whether we are anticipating what it will be like when we do, or whether we are sharing our experience of the decisions that we made. For me, it was a household decision, and it was a coven decision. I raised a stepson from when he was 1 until when he was 10, so this is my experience of that. Unfortunately, when he was 10, his daddy and I had to separate, but I spent the most enjoyable years raising him. I loved being his mama. And I'll give you an update on him at the end of this video. So, the household decision was easy and comfortable for us, even as it provided us with challenges. My husband was not pagan, but he was very supportive of my community, and he was actually very involved in it. He loved who we were and what we did. And he actually had personal practices that weren't too different from a lot of what we did, even though it was from his Christian perspective. So what we knew we wanted our little one to share was our passion for the natural world, the way in which we each saw God through it, the way it inspired and moved us and gave us a place to escape to when we needed it. We remembered, both of us, growing up as children, running kind of free in the fields and the woods behind the houses in the neighborhood we grew up in. We actually had known each other in those years. We wanted that replicated for our son. The beauty and the freedom and the belonging that was part of what we had always experienced. Here's what we didn't want for our son. I didn't want to raise a specifically pagan child, and my husband did not want to raise a specifically Christian child. It was easier for me because it just meant that I kept my concepts of the specifics of deity to myself and shared the beauty of an earth-based practice with my son. It was a bit more challenging for my husband because off they went to church, and sometimes I would go with them. And there was community, and there was a set of expectations that our little one had to meet as he got older and could feel that coming in from those around him. I think my husband did a great job, though, of saying, this is a way Dad chooses to celebrate. This is how Dad sees God, but it's not the only way. And we left it be like that until little guy was old enough to say to me, what do you think? What do you believe? Because then it was the time to have that kind of conversation with him. So the conversation happened when he came to me. It was not belittling my views. It was that the world we lived in and the community he was part of with his dad when they went to church was real and present to him when he was a little guy. And when he came of an age where he could ask questions and you could have a conversation, we could expand it to embrace what it was for me. Now, it never was what it was for me at a specific Wiccan level. Because I felt strongly, and so did his dad, that we didn't want to put any expectations upon this little being, what he had to believe, because neither one of us believed it. So we offered him answers to his questions about what each of us believed, and he saw how we lived our spirituality day to day. When it came to my coven, there were special activities for our children when we gathered for the celebrations at the turning of the wheel. They had their own celebrations. In my coven, about half of us, both of the couples that were in the circle, if both were in the circle, were pagan. But we had pagan partners who practiced differently, and we had non-pagan partners. And we intentionally decided what this would be for our families. What we did pledge to in my coven was to have a home altar and to be present there and with our families for family celebrations. But there wasn't any promise as to what that was. It was to be what was right within each of our households. For hours, Jamie would bring things he found on walks and put on the altar, and we would talk about the changing of the seasons, and it was very earth-based without being religion-based. That was actually probably what it was like for most of the households that we were with. And the celebrations that we had for our children at each of the turnings of the 8 were the same kind of thing. We would do drumming circles for them or take them on a hike at night. Oh, there's nothing more wondrous to a young child to take a flashlight and go on a hike at night. We had all kinds of activities to tie them into the land and the spirit of the land, but specifically nothing focused on specific deity. Oh, we worked with them when it came to elements and elementals and the feeling of what each element might be. But it was our practice in our coven not to include children in our Wiccan specific rites. They were seen as adult. And when our children came of an age that they were interested in pursuing more adult focus, they would be assigned a mentor from within our coven, not one of their parents. And this was done with intent. Again, I think most of us had come from, I think everybody in my first coven had come from pressure to conform to religious expectations from their families. And sometimes there was a comfortable getting away from that, and sometimes there was not. In fact, there were family schisms for some of them. We did not want, under any circumstances, for our children to feel influenced in specifics by us. We wanted them influenced at certain levels, no doubt about it. What parent does not? But we didn't want to influence their developing relationship with deity until they were of an age, and for us, because of the nature of our tradition and its guidelines, that was 18 years of age. Now, that doesn't mean that a young person before 18 couldn't begin studying and working with mentors and guides. We didn't have a firm age for that. But sometimes, come 15 or 16, the elders who decided on behalf of our coven would bring us together to talk about a child that was ready for some kind of next step. It was truly beautiful. I don't know if I can capture that or not. It's a little different from a lot of what you are experiencing because you're solitary practitioners, the majority of you. It was, in some sense, by all who already knew and loved this child, because the children were included in everything we did. So no child was a stranger. We all had a sense of how they were each different and how they each had different needs and what we could be to them. And we as a group, including of course their parents, decided what the coven could bring to them. They were then assigned a mentor to work with them. We like to assign both a male and a female mentor who were not related to each other, so that the child would have consistency of varied approach in the way the adults worked with them. We had formal studies that they could follow beginning at 17, because we would accept them into our initiatory program at 18. While this could seem to you, especially as a solitary, some kind of a structure which kept the children outside of our coven, it was instead about freedom. It was encouraging them to discover what was for them, not living up to any expectations of community. I never encountered this in a more formal religious sense until I became a Unitarian Universalist. And indeed, that is exactly how our children are raised. They are exposed to all kinds of religions and spiritual expressions in their Sunday schools. And then they make a declaration as a young adult what it is for them, with no expectations from the adults in their community that it needs to be any particular thing. So, raising a child that way is certainly not unique or unusual, but it was in the time I was raising Jamie. I was in my late 20s and early 30s at the time, so we're talking 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. It worked out well if we use Jamie as an example. He was definitely my fae child. He could get lost watching clouds. He'd rather be outside than inside. He had an active imagination, which later meant that he could meditate and pray very powerfully. He loved the gatherings and the celebrations. He also loved the gatherings and the celebrations at his father's church. And he saw how and he knew I believed differently. He saw how I enjoyed them too. When he became old enough to ask questions, one of the ones he asked was, well, why did you ever even go to church with Daddy and I if you don't believe what we believe? And I was able to then begin some more serious teaching, in a sense, by telling him, here's what your dad and I both believe in. I never put any expectations on Jamie by saying, what do you believe in? Until he was able to really have a conversation. And he really, by 9, he actually was able to have that kind of conversation with me. A sense of where his direction might take him. Here's how it ended up for Jamie. He ended up always being a child and then a man of nature. He loved it. He picked up all his daddy's traits for being outside, and his family, he came from a family of hunters. While he never hunted, he was far too soft-hearted for that. He became a very active environmentalist, protecting the land, and often with his father's hunter friends. He loved to sail. He loved to be on the water. He loved to take walks and hikes and be out of doors, and this followed him through his college years and on into his life. He always felt God out there, as well as he was always very introspective, even as a youngster. He felt God within too. Jamie's path took him into Christianity. A kind of liberal free-form Christianity. In fact, he had to seek out that form of Christianity because Jamie is gay, and he had to find churches who accepted him and welcomed him, and who would marry him and his husband later in his life. He had the best of both worlds from his father and I. His father had a very loving relationship to the Christian God. I actually learned a lot from his father about the beauty and power of Christianity, and from his father's community and church. And he also got from his pagan brothers and sisters, the little ones he grew up with, running wild while we were having our rituals, a sense of belonging at that earth-centric, ancient way. What was important to me and his dad at that time, and it's the way I've always looked at children, is involving them in community, letting them know how important they are, how much they are loved and respected, but not putting any expectations of belief or practice on them. To this day, I still strongly believe in the way we supported our young people. We decided as a community what it would be. The power of knowing that not just your adults, the mom and dad that you knew that loved you, but that all the adults you came in contact knew you, loved you, and respected you. Creating celebrations just for them, but keeping it at a level that was outside of the specific Wiccan practices of the adults in our coven. Some of Jamie's little pagan friends from those days went on to study and became leaders. At this point, some of them arriving at eldership in Wiccan circles. Some of them, I think actually the majority of them, ended up, like many of you, celebrating in a unique and individual way, not feeling the need to be connected to someone's idea of what should be and the way a practice should be. Some of them remained part of their family's Christian tradition, but I really believe with a deeper relationship to it, truly knowing this is what it is and this is what I believe, not because someone told me, but because it truly is that for me. My thoughts on it are the importance of community and supporting our children, and my personal belief that they should be free to explore and arrive at what is for them without expectations put upon them by any of the adults in their life regarding religion, and this is what you must believe or you must do. Basically, for me, it comes down to creating an environment where they become spiritual children outside of anyone's religious expectations of them. I wish you mirth and reverence. Mary Part.